June 21, 1964. 6:12 p.m. The sun was still hanging over Harlem, turning Lenox Avenue sidewalks into sheets of gold. Shopkeepers were closing metal gates halfway, kids were still tossing balls at brick walls, and old men on milk crates were arguing about baseball like the world wasn't about to crack. Then the sirens came. Not the slow, lazy wail of an ambulance. The sharp, impatient scream of a police cruiser cutting through the evening. 17-year-old Darrell Collins heard them before he saw the car. He had one hand in his pocket, the other around a small brown paper bag with a loaf of bread and a can of beans, his mother's dinner list. He wasn't a gangster. He wasn't a runner. He was just a skinny kid in a white t-shirt and worn jeans, walking home from the corner store. The squad car screeched to a stop half a block ahead of him. 2 officers jumped out. Late 20s. Faces tight with that mixture of boredom and authority people in Harlem recognized too well. "You," one of them shouted, pointing straight at Darrell. "Come here." Darrell froze. Looked over his shoulder to see if they meant someone behind him. "Nah, don't look around," the second cop barked. "With the bag." Darrell's stomach tightened. He glanced down at his clothes, at the groceries, at his empty hands. "Yes, officer?" he said, keeping his voice steady the way his mother taught him. "Where you coming from?" the first cop demanded. "The store," Darrell answered. "Mr. Green's Market on 127th. "What's in the bag?" the second cop snapped. "Bread. Beans." Darrell held it up like proof. The first cop snatched the bag, tore it open, dumped the contents onto the hood of the police car. Bread and a dented can rolled toward the windshield. "Smartus," the cop muttered. "What you doing hanging on this block?" "I live on this block," Darrell said quietly. That was the wrong answer. The second cop stepped closer, close enough for Darrell to smell stale coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "We got a report," he said. "Tall black male, white t-shirt, jeans, loitering, maybe dealing. That you?" Darrell's voice shook just a little. "No, sir. I'm just going home." "Then why you nervous?" the first cop asked. "Because you're here," Darrell thought. "Because I've heard stories. Because boys who look like me don't always make it home when men who look like you pull them aside." He didn't say any of that. He made the mistake of saying nothing. "Turn around," the second cop ordered. "For what?" Darrell blurted, panic finally surfacing. The first cop smiled without humor. "For resisting." A few people had stopped walking now. A woman in a flowered dress. A man smoking on his stoop. A boy Darrell knew from school, frozen with his backpack half on. "Officers, he just came from my store," Mr. Green called from the corner, lifting a hand. "He don't cause no." "Go back inside," the first cop snapped without looking at him. Darrell took a step back. Just one. Instinct, not strategy. "Don't you move," the second cop snarled, grabbing his arm. "I didn't do nothing." Darrell protested, louder than he meant to. And in that instant, the story was written. Later, the report would say, subject became combative. Resisted arrest. Officers used minimal necessary force to restrain. What really happened on that sidewalk was something different. One cop shoved Darrell into the side of the car, hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The other yanked his arms behind his back before he could regain his balance. "Stop resisting," the first cop shouted, even though the only thing moving was panic in the boy's eyes. A knee drove into Darrell's thigh. A forearm pressed across his neck. His cheek scraped the hot metal of the hood. He gasped. "I'm not," he choked out. "I'm not." Fingers dug into his shoulder blade. A boot slammed into the back of his calf. His knees hit the sidewalk. To everyone watching, it looked less like an arrest and more like 2 grown men practicing a ritual they knew by heart. Within a minute, Darrell was handcuffed, dragged to the open door of the squad car, and shoved inside. The brown paper bag, the bread, the beans, they stayed on the street. The sirens started again. The car pulled away. The small crowd dispersed the way crowds do when they've learned the cost of carrying out loud. Mr. Green picked the bread up off the hood, brushed it off, stared for a long moment at the spot where the car had been, and then went back into his store. At 7:03 p.m., less than an hour later, a phone rang in a small railroad apartment on the third floor of a Lenox Avenue building. By 7:05 p.m., Mrs. Collins was on her knees on the kitchen floor, the phone dangling from her hand, the words, "We're sorry, ma'am. There was an incident. Your son? He resisted. He didn't make it," echoing in her ears. By 7:30 p.m., the story was already out. They killed that Collins boy. Police say he resisted arrest. Another one? They just gonna keep saying that. By 8:15 p.m., someone had walked into Small's Paradise and told Bumpy Johnson. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. He just closed his eyes, breathed once, and said 5 words that would change Harlem's night. "Bring his mother to me." The official line came fast. By 9:22 p.m., NYPD had a press note ready. A 17-year-old male expired after a struggle with officers. Subject resisted arrest. Preliminary review indicates officers acted according to procedure. Procedure. Harlem had heard that word before. It meant, we're not going to look too closely. Mrs. Collins sat in a straight-back chair in Bumpy's back office, hands clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were dry now, the kind of dry that happens when you've gone past crying into something worse. Bumpy sat across from her, hat off, jacket unbuttoned. Not as a king. As a man. "Tell me exactly what they said," he asked gently. She swallowed. "They said Darryl attacked them," she whispered. "They said he tried to run and he fell wrong. Hit his head." Bumpy nodded once. "And before that? Anything else?" Mrs. Collins stared at a spot on the wall, as if she could still see the words floating there. They said he had a record." The shame in her voice on that last word made Bumpy's jaw tighten. "A record?" he repeated. "Does he?" She shook her head. "He got in a fight at school last year. They called the police just to scare the boys. They took his name. That's all. He ain't never been arrested. Never been in nobody's gang. He just goes to school and comes home and helps me." Her voice cracked on that last sentence. Bumpy nodded slowly. He'd grown up on these streets. He knew the difference between a bad seed and a kid who got swept in the wrong current. "Where is he now?" Bumpy asked. "At the precinct," she whispered. They said I can see him in the morning. At the morgue." Bumpy shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "You're going to see him tonight." Mrs. Collins blinked. They won't let me." "They won't let you," Bumpy corrected. "They'll let me." He stood and put his hat back on. "Go home," he said softly. "Stay with family. I'll send for you when it's time." She looked up at him, eyes suddenly wet again. "Mr. Johnson," she whispered, "they killed my boy." Bumpy's face didn't move. "I know," he said. "What are you going to do?" Bumpy's answer was simple. "First," he said, "I'm going to see if they're lying." At 10:03 p.m., a black sedan pulled up to the side door of the precinct. Not the front entrance where civilians waited. The side door where deals were made. Detective Murphy stood outside, smoking. He flicked the cigarette away when Bumpy stepped out. "This is a bad one," Murphy muttered. "Internal Affairs is already circling. Press 2. So they'll want it to look clean," Bumpy said. Murphy sighed. "They already wrote it up. Resisted arrest. Felt head trauma. They're sticking to it." Bumpy's voice was calm. "Let me see him." Murphy hesitated. "You know I can't just." Bumpy cut him off with a look. Murphy swallowed, glanced at the door, then at Bumpy. 5 minutes, Murphy said. "No cameras. No paperwork. You were never here." Inside, the hallway to the holding cells smelled like old sweat and disinfectant. At the end, in a small cold room, Darryl Collins lay on a steel table under a sheet. A single, uncaring fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Bumpy stepped closer, pulled the sheet back partway. The boy's face was too peaceful, the way young dead faces often are. A bruise along the hairline. A cut near the lip. If you only looked at his face, you might believe the story. Bumpy didn't. "Roll him," Bumpy said. Murphy glanced anxiously at the door. "We really shouldn't." "Roll him," Bumpy repeated. Murphy helped lift the boy enough for Bumpy to slide the sheet down and turn him partway over. The back of Daryl's white t-shirt came into view. At first it just looked dirty. Then the dirt became shapes. Prints. Boot prints. Dark, overlapping marks across the shoulders, along the spine, near the kidneys. The kind of pattern you get when someone is down and someone else is up, and standing there, driving their message into skin and bone. Bumpy's hand hovered for a second, then he touched one of the marks lightly. It wasn't paint. It was ground in street and boot sole. Murphy let out a low curse. Jesus, he muttered. They didn't even try to hide it. Bumpy's voice dropped. How many? He asked. Murphy squinted, counting. Looks like 3 different patterns. Maybe 4. 3 or 4 officers standing on a boy's back, Bumpy said flatly. And they called it resisted arrest. What did you expect them to call it? Murphy asked bitterly. A beating? Bumpy laid the sheet back over Daryl's shoulders, covering the worst of it. Hold him here, Bumpy said. Murphy frowned. The morgue is expecting. Hold him here, Bumpy repeated, until I say move him. Murphy swallowed. Bumpy, you're playing with fire. This is bigger than. Everything's bigger than Harlem until Harlem decides otherwise, Bumpy said quietly. Then he added, tomorrow afternoon, you're going to release the body to his mother. On Lenox. Not the morgue. Her block. You hear me? Murphy stared. On the street? He asked. You trying to start a riot? Bumpy's answer was cold and precise. I'm trying to start the truth. The next day, the city moved like it always did. People had to work. Kids had to go to school. Bills didn't stop just because a family's world had. But the story simmered under everything. They say the Collins boy fought the cops. That kid? He barely raised his voice. Doesn't matter. They already printed it. By 4:15 p.m., the block outside Mrs. Collins' building was heavier than usual. Word had gone out quietly, they bringing Daryl home. Today, Bumpy's handling it. People came not as an angry mob, but as a community that had buried too many children under official lies. Old women with church hats. Men in work boots. Teenagers in school jackets. Mothers holding toddlers on their hips. A hum of low voices, waiting. At 4:33 p.m., the black sedan appeared again, this time with a hearse rolling slowly behind it. Murphy stepped out first, eyes scanning the crowd, every muscle tight like he expected something to explode. Bumpy stepped out after. No fedora today. Just a dark suit and a face carved in stone. Mrs. Collins stood on the stoop, held up by 2 neighbors. The back of the hearse opened. 2 men slid the stretcher out. Daryl was under a clean sheet now, but Bumpy could still see the outline of a boy who should have been alive. Right here, Bumpy said, pointing to a spot in the middle of the sidewalk. Not inside. Right here. One of the men hesitated. It's not. You heard him, Murphy snapped. Here. They laid the stretcher down like an altar. The crowd closed in, tight but silent. Bumpy looked at Mrs. Collins. Do you want to see him? He asked. She nodded once, lips trembling. Then everyone sees him, Bumpy said. He raised his voice just enough to carry. You all heard what they said, he called. He resisted arrest. He fell. They did what they had to do. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. We're going to see if that's true, Bumpy said. He bent and slowly peeled the sheet back from Daryl's face. A collective gasp went up as mothers saw sons in that still expression, as fathers saw the boys they'd once been. Now, Bumpy said quietly, turn him. 2 men stepped forward. Carefully, respectfully, they turned the stretcher just enough for Bumpy to reach the back of the shirt. He slid his fingers under the fabric and lifted. The white cotton rose. The first boot print appeared. Gasps became curses. He lifted more. More prints. Obvious. A woman screamed. Someone shouted, Lord have mercy. Another voice cut through, raw and furious. They stomped that boy. Bumpy didn't speak for a moment. He let the block see everything the report had left out. This is what resisting arrest looks like to them, he said finally. A child face down in the street. 4 grown men on his back. Boots on his ribs. Boots on his spine. He let the shirt fall back down gently. Them, he repeated, called it procedure. The crowd buzzed with fury now, but it wasn't blind. It was focused. Murphy shifted nervously, eyes darting to the closest patrol car at the corner. 2 uniforms sat inside, watching, faces pale. Bumpy straightened and pointed, not at the cops, not at City Hall. At the crowd. They think they can do this in the dark, he said. They think they can say, resisted arrest, and we'll just bury our children quiet. He looked at Mrs. Collins, then back at the faces around him. Not today. That night, Harlem sat on a powder keg. Anger like that doesn't just vanish. Some wanted to burn the precinct down. Some wanted to drag cops into the street and return every kick, every stomp, every slammed baton. But Bumpy understood something almost no one else did. The city was waiting, almost hoping, for Harlem to explode. Because explosions are easy to condemn. Headlines are easy to twist. Riot in Harlem was a story the newspapers already had inked and ready to go. Police stomped a boy to death in custody was not. So instead of lighting the match, Bumpy did something else. He lit up the truth. By 10 p.m., copies of a simple handout were being passed from barbershop to bar, from church to poker room. No graphics. No speeches. Just words. Darryl Collins. 17. Arrested for resisting. Boot prints on his back. Witnessed by the block. We see you. We remember. At the same time, Bumpy made 3 quiet phone calls. One to a preacher with a big church and a bigger congregation. One to a black reporter at a small downtown paper who was tired of being told which stories would sell. And one to a lawyer who actually believed the law could be forced to work if you hit it hard enough with facts. The next morning, a photograph appeared in that small paper. Grainy. Black and white. Shot from an angle that kept faces anonymous, but clear enough to show a lifted shirt and the pattern on a back that should never have been touched. The headline was small but nuclear. Boot prints on a child. Harlem questions, resisted arrest, story. It wasn't the Times. It wasn't national. But in Harlem, it was gasoline on truth. By noon, Internal Affairs knocked on the precinct captain's door. They'd been planning to file it under unfortunate incident. Now there was print. Now there were questions. By 3 p.m., the captain knew something else. Nobody on that block was afraid to say what they saw anymore. Because they'd seen Bumpy stand in the street, lift that shirt, and force the truth into daylight with a whole neighborhood as witness. That changes people. It tells them they're not crazy. It tells them they're not alone. The captain called 4 officers into his office. Why the hell are there boot prints on that kid's back? He demanded. Excuses flew. He struggled. He rolled under us. We were restraining him. He'd heard it all before. But for once, there were more eyes on them than just his. That night, quietly, without press conferences, 2 of those officers were moved off the street, pending investigation. One was told to find another precinct. Another was told to find another job. It wasn't justice. But it was a crack. And crack spread. Within a week, something else changed. Something that mattered even more than disciplinary memos. Patrol cars still rolled through Harlem. Uniforms still walked beats. But they walked like men who knew a pair of eyes was on their back. Not just Bumpy's. Harlem's. They thought twice before slamming a boy into a wall for walking too slow. Thought twice before dragging a handcuffed kid down the steps a little too hard. Because boot prints leave marks. And now everyone knew to look. In the months that followed, people would argue about what Bumpy had done. Some said, he should have burned that place down. That's the only language they understand. Others said, he saved our boys by not giving them the riot they wanted to see. The truth sits somewhere in the space between. Bumpy didn't bring Darryl back. He couldn't. But he made sure Darryl didn't leave quietly. He made sure the phrase resisted arrest never sounded innocent in Harlem again. And he taught a precinct one lesson they wouldn't forget. When you step on a child in this neighborhood, the whole block is going to see the footprints. If this story of a boy, a lie, and a neighborhood that stopped letting the system write its own ending hit you, do one thing before you scroll. Hit that like button so more people hear it. Subscribe for more untold Harlem legends. And tell me in the comments. If you lived on that block, would you have wanted fire? Or would you have chosen the truth the way Bumpy did? Because sometimes, the loudest thing you can do in a city that lies is make everyone look